Hi there, and welcome to another episode. This time I will take you on a walk, and we will talk about Know Your Fiber. But before I start, I will just make two, call it announcement? No, I will just talk about two things first. Number one is that in this episode, I'm not judging anyone. It will be about choosing yarn. And I know that we all have different preferences when it comes to what yarn we choose. It has to do with a lot of different things. We also have different budgets. We also have different needs. You know what I talked about in the last episodes. All yarn doesn't suit for everyone's need. So there are a lot of different factors that affect your choice. But what I want to achieve with this episode, it is for you to be aware of the yarn that you choose. So you know what you are actually choosing, to make active choices, to be aware of the choices you are actually making. So that's kind of the purpose of this episode. It's not about judging and saying that something is better than something else. The second acknowledgement I want to make is that I am not an expert on different fibers and yarn and how they are produced and anything else. What I know is what I have read, that I've done some own fact-finding on the internet and in books and booklets, what I have heard in different podcasts or talking to people, and my own analysis and conclusions from that, and my own experiences in knitting for a lot, like at least 20, 30. I guess I've been knitting for about 30 years. So I've learned a lot and experienced a lot. So I'm not an expert. And if you are an expert, you will probably see that there are things that I am missing. Maybe I say something that is not correct at all, or because I have misunderstood something. Please comment if you have more information that you want to share with others. But the purpose that I have for this episode, as I said, it is to make you curious so that you actually can make active choices, to be aware of the choices you make, and be more curious on what you're actually holding in your hand when you are knitting. Okay, why do I want to make this episode then? Yes, of course, it's really important for you to know your fiber, so you can make the choices that will provide you with the garment that you want to have. But if I see on my journey when it comes to choosing yarn, when I started knitting, the preferences I had when it came to yarn, it was, I want something that is soft, I want it to be cheap, and in a nice color. So that was pretty much that. I probably know that there are yarn in cotton and yarn in wool, and that they feel different, but nothing more than that. I never thought about how they were produced, or where they were produced, or what was the difference between wool and wool. I could read at the label and often it said new wool. And I like, okay, then it's new. It's not old, but I didn't really bother to find out anything about the difference. So that was in the beginning. And when I have knitted a little bit longer and started to knit more, like I say, advanced patterns, I became more aware about having a yarn with a good quality. Because if you put in so many hours in a garment, I want it to last and I want it to have those properties that I'm looking for. And I then realized that there is a big difference between a wool, 100% wool yarn with a good quality compared to a cheap yarn when it comes to price. I also had realized that there was a difference in the quality. A cheap yarn was many times pilling, in Swedish, noppar, more than maybe a yarn with a better quality. But also that 100% wool yarn could be a little bit itchy. So I started to get to know the yarn or the choices and what was available a little bit more. But I didn't really bother on still how it was produced or what was the difference between wool and wool. I didn't really see that there were different breeds. It's like, it's a sheep. But I would say that for the last year, basically, since I started putting in Swedish and I came in contact with Icelandic wool, started knitting, like that was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And then I came in contact with the unspun wool, and then I came in contact with Nutiden unspun wool. That was kind of when I actually starting to be aware and actively finding out what I was holding in my hand. That there is a difference between different breeds, and that there is a lot of Swedish wool to find in Sweden that are made by local producers, spinners, and that there are differences in how animals are treated in different parts of the world, that there is a big difference between how the laws when it comes to treating animals and environmental laws are different in the world, and so on. And I've started realizing that there isn't actually such thing as a cheap yarn, because someone is paying for it. Even if you are not paying for it, it will be the workers or the animals that are paying for it. But with that said, it doesn't mean that a cheap yarn isn't automatically a bad yarn, or expensive yarn isn't automatically a good yarn. But we need to be aware about it, and we need to have the information so we can make those choices. And then when I got aware about that there is a big difference, I started to look at the labels of these, especially the bigger brands. When it comes to locally produced, they want to provide those information, that where it's spun, where it's what sheep, what breed it's there. Is there wool from lamb, or is it from ewe, from takka, and so on. So those local producers, they want to give that information because it shows that that's a part of their brand or branding themselves. But when it comes to bigger producers, they are usually not providing that information. You see on the label what is it, wool or nylon or cotton or and so on, but mostly nothing else. It doesn't really provide information on where those sheep or come from or where the cotton is produced. It doesn't say where it's spun. You have to. I tried to find it on internet by googling their sites, but not very easy to find. So I am encouraging everyone to, when you are buying yarn, to actually try to find more information. And if it doesn't say it on the label, then ask the person in the yarn shop and make them ask the producer or the one who is delivering yarn to them. So maybe if we as buyer of yarn are actually demanding to have that information, maybe we can make a change. Just as it is when it comes to food, that there is on the package, the information is provided what the package is actually holding and where it comes from. So why couldn't we have that on yarn as well? Yeah, that's pretty much it. So the purpose with this episode is for you to be more curious, so you by yourself can find out more information. So I'm going to tease you a little bit on knowing your fiber. When it comes to the fiber, I see that there are 3 different kind of main fibers. First, we have the synthetic fiber. That is like acrylic, polyamide, nylon fibers. And they are made from oil. And I must admit, I have very little knowledge on how they are made. I guess that they are sprayed, so they are a thin thread and then are spun. But since synthetic yarn is usually have different properties, I guess that are different way of producing that yarn. So the synthetic fiber. And then we have the plant-based fiber. For example, cotton, linen, hemp, and other kind of fibers that are from cellulose, like wood, trees. So that are plant-based. Those fibers are produced in another way to be able to spin those fibers to yarn. And those fibers usually have quite different properties compared to the fibers that comes from animals. And the fibers from animals are silk, that is from the silkworm. We have, of course, the fiber from wool, from the sheep wool, but there are also fibers. Who is coming? There are also these wool fibers from, for example, alpaca, llama, that you can use. Other animals that you can actually spin yarn from is Angora rabbits. That makes a very, very, very fine, very soft yarn. You have also the Angora goat, and that is the goat that provides the mohair fiber. So that is called the Angora goat, at least in Swedish. But then it's called Angora get. Then there has also in older times been taken hair or fibers from horses and cows, also to make project, well, maybe not to wear as clothes, but to make carpets and other things. And then know that there are also people that are using fibers from the dogs and cats to spin yarn from. So there are many different animals that can provide fibers for spinning, and that will come yarn for knitting. And all these different fibers have different properties. In general, you can say that a plant-based fiber is not that elastic. I think that many of you that had knitted in cotton yarn or linen yarn feel that they are quite tough on your fingers. And then they're hard, they're not very forgiving compared to a yarn in any kind of wool that are much more elastic and much more forgiving. And it's kind of, it behaves in different ways. And when it comes to the synthetic fiber, it can many times image or copy properties from both plant-based fibers and wool, animal made fibers. But it's only some of the properties that a synthetic yarn can copy, not all the properties. Because if you look at the fiber of wool, it's very unique, and I don't think that the industry have managed to copy that fiber yet. So what we'll talk about today, it is the wool, the sheep wool fiber, and we will dig a little bit deeper into that. I wish that I could show you how the lamb is born, how the sheep are grazing through the summer, how the sheep are sheared in the autumn. In Sweden, you have to shear your sheep at least once a year. And the wool that is sheared in the autumn is usually the best because that's the cleanest. I wish that I would be able to show you how the wool is sorted so that it's only the best part that becomes the fleece that then goes to washing. And after that, how the wool is combed or carded, depending on what you're going to do with it, how it's spun, and how it's twined to become a woolen yarn. But since I don't have any sheep, I don't live near anyone I know with sheep, and I don't have a mill, and I will not be able to show you that. But that's like the process for yarn, from the sheep to a yarn. It's many different steps that you have to pass before you can actually have a yarn. But what I will show you here today, it is the difference between different yarns. And what is the difference between different fibers and the difference between different breeds. Let's see if we can avoid the sun. Yeah, it's sunny today. You shouldn't avoid the sun. But when it comes to the fiber, Many people think that a woolen, for example, a sweater or a hat in wool, it's itchy. It's like, it's itchy and scratchy. And many don't want to wear wool just because of that. And that depends on if wool is itchy or like pinchy or whatever you call it. It depends on how thick the fiber is. And you have mainly two different layers on the sheep. You have the underwool that is closest to the skin of the sheep. And that wool, the purpose of that is that it should be isolating. So it's usually quite curly and soft, and it should hold a lot of air. So the underwool is good for having like clothes that you actually want to have close to your body, close to your skin, and that should keep you warm. That fiber is not as durable as the top wool. I don't know if that's the underwool and top wool is the correct expressions in English. In Swedish, you call it bottenull och täckhår. But I will say the underwool and the top wool. And then you just have to understand what I'm trying to say. The top wool is the outer layer of the sheep, or the wool and the fleece. And they are usually longer, not as curly, can be very shiny. And the purpose of that is to protect the sheep from the environment, from like wind and rain and so on. So those kind of, the top wool is more durable to tearing and also durable to water and so on. So in a sheep, it's usually those two different kind of wool. And they are also like a third layer for some old breeds, like we call it märghår, that the Gute får has, but I will not talk about that. So we would just see that it's the underwool and the top wool. And the kind of the thinnest, the finest fibers are usually in the underwool. It's usually from young animals, from lamb. But there are also different breeds that has really fine fibers. And you talk about microns, micrometer. So it's really, really, really thin fibers. If you look at your own hair, I think that you usually say that your hair is about maybe 60 or 80 microns. And if you knit something with the hair, it will probably be this kind of itchy. Because you can say that in general, people are has different sensibility to this. But in general, you can say that if you have something that is from 25 or 27 microns or like thinner, then it will not be itchy. But if you have something that is thicker, then it will probably feel it on your skin, because it's like this. It's like the fiber when it hits your skin. If it's bending, then it's thin enough. But if it's not bending, you will feel it in your skin. If we take the cotton fiber, I think that is about like kind of 10, 12, 13 microns. So it's very, very thin. And that's why cotton feels so soft. But wool is usually kind of between 20 and up. And if you have this really fine merino wool, then it's probably around kind of 20 to 25, somewhere there. If you have a Gotland wool, it's usually a little bit thicker, maybe up to 50, 60 microns. So that's kind of the explanation why some wool feels itchy on you and some wools doesn't. So saying that you cannot wear wool because you find it itchy, then that's because it doesn't mean that you cannot wear any wool unless you are allergic in any way. But it is that you have to choose the right wool. And then you have this superwash treatment that is mainly for treating wool not to shrink, get smaller when you are washing it. But that also affects that it doesn't feel that the fibers are kind of covered, so you don't feel it. So merino wool is, or superwash treated. It's usually merino wool that is superwash treated because it's so thin, that wool, so it's easier to shrink. But never mind. They are usually very soft. But I will not talk anything more about that. I don't know exactly how this superwash treatment is done and exactly what it does for the properties and the quality of wool. But what I want to show you now, it is how the fiber of different breeds look like. Because before I actually bought what I'm going to show you now, I didn't really have the acknowledgement of how the different fibers actually felt and looked like. And I mainly I've seen some sheep and I've seen the Finnish yarn. But this is very interesting. So I'm going to turn around here, and I have here on the stone put up 5 different fiber types or breeds that I thought that we should look at a little bit further. So now you see that I have the handheld camera, so I can only show you with my left hand, but I hope that will be okay. We will start with this one, that is the Gotland wool. Gotland is a breed, Swedish breed, that is probably there are many Gotland sheep in Sweden, probably one of the largest quantity of sheep, or what do you say? So it's very usual, and that's because you can use both the wool and the skin and also the meat. So if you look at this, the wool, you see what Gotland is very famous for, and it's like this kind of silky locks, curly hair. The Gotland sheep, or that breed, the fleece consists mainly of this top wool. So it's not that much of the bottom or the underwool. It's mainly this top wool. And that gives this lovely curls. And it's usually in different gray, black, gray, white colors. And it's really silky. And it's lovely. I don't know if you can see if it's focusing. So it's really lovely and silky. I don't know if it's focusing properly. So if you knit something in this Gotland wool, it will probably be a little bit like itchy. It's also not that easy to spin 100% a yarn with 100% of Gotland, because of it that it is so silky. So you're usually mixing this with another fiber just to have it a little bit easier to spin it. So this is the Gotland wool. Really beautiful. Just look at this. Lovely. The next one I have, you see here, it says Hälsinge Gästrike. And that is one of the old heritage breeds in Sweden. We call it allmogefår, and there are different kinds. And those were more or less, they would probably have been more or less gone, but they were found and kept so that you were still kind of breeding on them, just because that they have properties that you cannot really find in the, what do you call it, the modern sheep. So these kind of allmogefår, they are old heritage, and they have adapted to the environment where they lived. They are usually grazing both in fields and forests, and they are very, very durable sheep. And they have both this underwool and the top wool in kind of one sheep. So, and also these sheep are not similar. In one flock you probably have some sheep with a nice top wool and some with a very much nice underwool and so on. So except from this Hälsinge Gästrike ull, you also have the, for example, Värmland, that if you have heard about the Nutiden yarn and following Höner och Eyr, you know that they have a small flock with Värmlands får. And there are some other that are more local. And yeah, they are very, what do you call it, mångsidig. They are flexible, they have a multi-purpose wool, you can call it. Not super soft, but the underwool can be very soft. But it's a tough one, a versatile wool to have. You can see here there are many different colors and qualities in this. The next wool I have here is the Leicester. It's like the Swedish Leicester that was imported to Sweden from England some time ago. And it's white. It's always more or less white. And it reminds you pretty much of Gotland. So this nice, beautiful white, curly fibers, but very shiny. So from this you can have really beautiful, shiny white yarn. I don't know if it's focusing this camera. You cannot really do anything to make it focus. No, I hope it's good enough. So this is the Leicester. So what it looks like Gotland and pretty much feels like Gotland. But it's white, or this kind of a little bit yellowish warm white, I would say. So Leicester. Then we have finull, or fine wool. This should not be mixed up with, for example, the brand Rauma that has one yarn that they call finull. This is the breed finull. And this is a breed that has mainly the underwool. And here you can see that this is really soft and really curly. And it says here, it says finull and gobelängull. And gobelängull is just that it's those parts of the fiber that is not that curly. It's a little bit less curly. So it has to be, it's not another breed, it's just how you explain the curliness. But this is then finull. And this is so soft. You can say that it's like the merino wool, the Swedish merino wool. So super soft. You cannot feel any itchiness from this. And as I said, mainly the underwool on this breed. And you can see that it's really curly. It means that it's very elastic. The wool gets kind of like elastic of it compared to the Gotland wool that is so silky. It's more like this becomes very light, and the Gotland wool becomes a little bit more heavy because it doesn't have that air in it. It's more these kind of silky locks that gives a more heavier and thinner yarn. And this fine wool gets a more soft and airy wool. And for spinning, you many times are mixing these two breeds, these two fibers together to have the Gotland for the shine and the fine wool to kind of gluing it together to make it easier to spin. And then last, we have another old breed called Rya ull. And it's kind of the mohair of Swedish mohair. So it's very soft and so shiny. And this was also a breed that if they hadn't found it and kept it, and I read some stories that there were these kind of bigger sheep, the meat breeds that were imported, but many kept these small Rya sheep just because they made such a beautiful yarn, and you can make beautiful fabric of it. So they kept it, even if they would said like, no, there's not a nice breed to keep because they are too small, they don't give that much meat. But luckily it was kept and found, and they realized that this is something that we should really keep because it gives beautiful yarn. And Rya comes also in different colors. I know this one white, and I know that it comes also in black, and probably something in between there as well. So this is so soft and shiny. This is kind of really luxurious. But there are not many Rya sheep left in Sweden. So if you can come over some Rya, then treat it well and use it for something special. So that was those kind of fibers that I wanted to show you. Well, spinning on a spindle is not really, I'm not really good at it. But I'm trying. And I have some carded wool that I'm just spinning. Take it off there. For it to become something that you can make a yarn from. Usually you spin first. So it's like spinning it in one direction. And then you take those 2 strands are spun, and then you twine it in the other direction. So this is something that at least I need to practice more. Here I have carded wool. Is it called carded in English? Is that you have taken this wool and then you have put it in a carder to actually fluff it up a little bit and to have the fibers to lay more or less in the same direction. And you get, I think that this is a mix of different breeds, this kind of card floor that you can spin into wool. I should guess that it's quite a lot of fine wool in this one. It feels like that. So what you're actually doing when you're spinning it is to twist it. Give it a spin. Because when you give it a spin, it will be really, really strong. Compared to when it's not spun. When you just pull it apart. So that's the difference between like spun and unspun yarn. The unspun yarn that sells from like Nutiden and Plötulopi and other of these kind of unspun yarns, they are not sold in this kind of thing. They are more like the, what you call as a pre-yarn. This yarn, the carded yarn, is then you made this kind of, I don't know, but like threads, unspun threads that you can knit from. So we try to spin a little bit more. I think I should take a course of something to learn this properly. Or just keep on practicing. Eventually, maybe I have enough yarn to knit something from. This is yarn with a lot of personality, as you see. When it comes to knowing your fiber, it's not just only knowing where it comes from and how it's produced. I think it's also to know how it behaves when it gets in contact with wind, water, earth, and fire. And I have thought a little bit and realized that I will test for one of these elements. I thought about how do you test for wind, and I thought that I think it's more dependent on how you have knitted and how you have treated the yarn and the fabric to how windproof it is. So it's a little bit difficult to test the fibers for that. And when it comes to water, yes, a garment that has the lanolin left in it and have a lot of the original properties of the wool left will probably be more water repellent. But it's also a little bit difficult to test with the test methods that I have available. And when it comes to earth or dirt and how dirt repellent it is, well, it's also a little bit difficult to test. But when it comes to fire, I thought, I think that I can test that. So I have made swatches. And I have made 5 different swatches. The swatch number 1 is in Nutiden. The unspun, untreated wool, just dyed. Have a lot of the lanolin left in it. Then I have another wool. This is Lättloppy. It's a spun yarn that also is what you call untreated. Of course, it's treated, it's washed, and it's dyed, but it's not superwash treated. So also have a lot of the original properties of the fiber left. And then I have sock yarn. This is a sock yarn that is treated for shrinking. It's not the ordinary superwash treated, but it's treated for shrinking. And it contains merino wool and also about 20% of nylon. And then I made a swatch with silk mohair. So silk and mohair fiber and probably some merino wool in it as well. And then I also have a swatch made of 100% synthetic. It is acrylic and polyamide fiber in this one, so 100% synthetic. So my plan is to try out how these swatches behaves when they get in contact with the fire. I have never tried this before, so it will be very interesting. So I am out here camping. We are collecting some firewood right now, and we'll start making dinner soon. And after that, we will have some yarn barbecue, and it will be very interesting to see how that turns out. So see you later. So, now we will try and see how these swatches behave when they get in contact with fire. We're going to do this in 2 sets. First, I will take this swatch and just lower it slowly into the fire and then getting it up again and see how it behaves. And then in the second set, we will actually keep the swatch into the fire and see how it behaves and what will happen. So I will start with this first one in Nutiden yarn. You ready? Okay, it got a little bit black, but it's okay. Then I change to the Lättloppy swatch. Not much happened. Now we go into the silk mohair and see what will happen. Not much either. And then we take the sock yarn. Not much happened on that one either. And finally, the one in synthetic. It's okay. So from the first round, conclusion is that if you have a knitted garment on and just getting quick contact with fire, it's okay. It will probably not start burning or melting on you. So, now to the second round. And now we're going to keep the swatch in the fire and see what will happen. And we're going to do 2 swatches at the same time. I will have the swatch in Nutiden, and then we will also have the swatch in Silk Mohair. Okej, då kör vi. Oj, 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 oj. The one in Silk Mohair is getting really black. Oh, now it starts burning. In Nutiden, it's getting black, but it hasn't caught fire yet. Don't try this at home. Your swatch doesn't look that happy. Okay, should we take it out and see? Okay, the one in Silk Mohair has really melted. The one in Nutiden, it melted finally, but it didn't really caught fire unless you put it into the fire. Yep, that was that. Now we take some other swatches. I take the one in Lättloppig, and you take the one in Sock Yarn. You ready? Mm-hmm. We'll see. It's getting blackened quite easy. Is it melting or?
No.
Put it into the fire. Oh. Now it caught fire. Oh. It's burning and melting. The Lättloppig is only, it's not melting, but it's getting black. Mm. seems like the yellow one is easily catching fire. And now this one is caught fire as well. Are we ready? Okay, the silk yarn has become black and looks like it has melted a little bit. The Lättlopi has also gotten black and a lot of, what do you call it, soot. Yeah. And now we will take the last one. And that's the synthetic one. It's burning. Ooh. The woolen one usually stopped burning when you just lifted it up a little bit, but this one is actually
Continue.
This will continue and just increase burning. Oh, I wouldn't want to have a sweater in that material. You can just lift it up a little bit. There you see. That swatch is burning really bad. It's like a torch. And nothing left. Some melted material is left. Okay, that's what will happen when you do some yarn barbecue. Some reflections from the yarn barbecue. The wool, the two swatches in 100% wool, that one in Lättlopi and the one in Nutiden yarn, they were actually quite hard to get to start burning, to catch fire. And when it started burning, it was when you actually put it down into the fire. And if you just pulled it up from the fire and held it into the air, it stopped burning. And it more or less, when you really try to make them burn, it was more or less just turned into coal, like in Swedish, förkolna. So it's kind of just went into nothing, something black, coaly, as a result. But quite hard to get to start catching fire. The silk mohair swatch, it actually caught fire relatively easy after you put it into the fire. And it kept burning a little while, even if you held it up into the air again. And when it came to the sock yarn, it didn't catch fire that easy, but when it started burning and you held it up into the air, it actually continued burning for a while. And I think that it's because of the nylon that actually starts burning and not that the merino wool was burning. And then we come to the synthetic swatch, and I had expected it to behave in a different way, and that's why I actually used a synthetic swatch. But I had more expected it to mainly melt. But what happened was that it caught fire easily, and when you held it up, it just continued burning and burning more and more intense. And it was like a torch. And it was also melting. It wasn't turning into coal. It was just melting down into the fire. And there it continued burning. Maybe you didn't see that. But I still get this kind of pictures in front of me that if someone is actually wearing a sweater in that material and catching fire and running around trying to turn it off, and I can't even imagine what kind of burns that will cause. So my conclusions from this test, and now I didn't test for all different kind of materials, I just choose a few. It is that I will never wear a synthetic sweater when I am around fire. And I really hope that you at least got aware about the difference between 100% wool and a synthetic material when it comes to fire. And really think twice, especially if you put this on a kid. Sweaters, mittens, hats and anything. And if the kid is around fire, and that could be candles, it could be this kind of bonfire during spring or a campfire. Because it doesn't take that much for it to catch fire, actually. And when it does catch fire, it can go really, really wrong. It could be really severe damage. So, as I said in the beginning, I don't want to judge anyone. You make your own choices, but I want you to make active choices, to be aware of what you are choosing. So, that was that for this week's theme on Know Your Fiber. I really hope that you have appreciated it, that it have made you even more curious on knowing your fiber and what you are actually knitting with. And also that you request this information from your local yarn shop and the one that is delivering the yarn to you, so that we raise this awareness among others. Because I think that it's important that we know what we are actually knitting with and know what we are wearing. So yeah, until next time, take care.